the American role in this has been quite sordid for a very, very long time. The goal, starting back in 1994, was to expand NATO and surround Russia in the Black Sea region. President Clinton signed off on that in 1994. Zbig Brzezinski wrote about it in The Grand Chessboard in 1997, explaining it, and explaining in a chapter that is completely wrong when you look back at it, said Russia will not be able to resist any of this. In 2002, the U.S. destabilized the relationship by unilaterally abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty. In 2008, the United States invited Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO, basically over strong objections by the Europeans, but the Europeans went along in the NATO Bucharest summit in 2008 over Russia's brightest red lines. This was all known, understood provocations. All of the diplomats knew it. European leaders knew it. I spoke with them at the time. Everybody understood this. In February 2014, the United States participated actively in a violent coup to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, who favored neutrality. This is very important to understand. The coup took place on February 22nd, 2014. Again, I saw some of this with my own eyes. It was ugly, the U.S. involvement in this coup. U.S. forces paid for this coup to an important extent. They stirred up this coup. This is all well understood. Now, in 2015, the war could have ended with the Minsk II agreements, but the United States and Ukraine, despite the UN Security Council backing, said, no, you don't have to do that. That was not a territorial claim on the Donbass by Russia. It was a claim for autonomy that the UN Security Council unanimously supported, and the U.S. and the governments in Ukraine, at the U.S. behest to an important extent, completely dissed. And then it's true that Biden and Putin met in 2021. But in December 2021, President Putin put on the table a draft U.S.-Russia security agreement. It was a completely negotiable document. I spent quite a bit of time speaking with the White House about that document. There should have been negotiations. The U.S. rejected negotiation over the central point, which was non-NATO enlargement to Ukraine. Biden knew what he was doing. It was a terrible mistake of the Democrats, let me say, and of President Biden and his team. Then in March 2022, just days after the start of Russia's invasion, but by the way, the war had been going on for years, but this escalation in starting February 22nd, 2022, just days after that, they went to the negotiating table. And they came very close to an agreement until the U.S. and Britain stopped it. Bojo, Boris Johnson, one of the most irresponsible politicians in our modern time, explained it explicitly later. He said this is a war about preserving Western hegemony. Yes, this was a proxy war against Russia. This was the plan all along. And the U.S. and U.K. told Zelensky, basically, leave. Now, again, as I said earlier, I went to Ankara to discuss this in detail with the diplomats. I know the details of what happened. Ukraine left the negotiations that could have ended this in March 2022 with few deaths, and instead there have been nearly 1 million deaths since then. This has been, unfortunately, a game of the United States for 30 years that Zbig Brzezinski spelled out in 1997. the U.S. thought they had the upper hand at every time. It was the economic sanctions or the weapons that were going to bring Russia to its knees. It was incredibly naive. I said so for many, many years.
Professor Sachs.
I said Ukraine will become the Afghanistan of Europe, and so it has. Now, today in Saudi Arabia, maybe Ukraine can be saved from what the U.S. deep state set along the path of the last 25 years.
Professor
and this is
Sachs,
the biggest hope of today.
Professor Sachs, Matt Duss said he agreed with a lot of what you said. And I was wondering if you agree with him in condemning Russia's invasion in 2022.
Of course I condemn Russia's invasion. And of course I condemn the reasons for the provocation. I condemn the destabilization of the nuclear framework, which was the most important element of all in this. The United States walked out of the ABM Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty unilaterally and would not negotiate with the Russians over this. The United States overthrew a government in Ukraine. The United States refused to negotiate with the Russians over basic security issues. This is a tragedy, but the core of the tragedy is U.S. unipolarity assumed by the neocons as early as 1992, put in place by Clinton starting in 1994, and it's been a consistent U.S. policy up until today, basically. And Trump is actually, amazingly, it seems, trying to change it, which is unbelievable for us. I voted for Biden, of course. I was also an advisor to Bernie Sanders. I just want to be clear. This is a shock to me that it's coming from this side of the American politics. The Dems became warmongers.